Pay attention to this living room footage from a nanny cam hidden inside a bookshelf. Two children, ages 4 and 6, sit motionless on a couch while their babysitter scrolls through her phone. And within the next 47 minutes, both of those children will vanish from this house, and the woman responsible for their safety will tell police a lie so brazen that it will take investigators 72 hours to unravel. This is the story of Emma and Lucas Whitfield and the 22-year-old babysitter who nearly destroyed their family. But to understand how two children could disappear from their own home in broad daylight, we need to go back 3 weeks before that footage was recorded, to a moment when Rachel and David Whitfield believed they had finally found someone they could trust. The Whitfields lived in Cedar Grove, a quiet suburb 40 minutes outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of place where neighbors still wave from their driveways and children ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. Rachel, 34, worked as a pediatric nurse at Mercy General Hospital, pulling 12-hour shifts 3 days a week. David, 37, managed a regional distribution center for a logistics company, which meant unpredictable hours and occasional weekend emergencies. For 2 years, they'd relied on Rachel's mother, Linda, to watch Emma and Lucas whenever their schedules collided. But in January of 2023, Linda suffered a minor stroke. She recovered well, but her doctors were clear. The stress of chasing 2 young children was no longer advisable. The Whitfields needed help. Rachel posted on 3 different neighborhood apps and a local Facebook group for parents. She was specific about what she wanted: someone with experience, references, CPR certification, and availability for weekday afternoons. Within 48 hours, she had 11 responses. Most were teenagers looking for spending money. A few were older women whose references didn't check out, but one application stood out. Megan Holloway was 22, a graduate of Central Piedmont Community College with an associate degree in early childhood education. She'd worked at a licensed daycare center for 18 months before leaving to pursue private childcare, which she said allowed her to give children more individualized attention. She provided 3 references, all glowing. She had current CPR and first aid certifications. Her background check came back clean. Rachel interviewed her on a Tuesday afternoon while the kids were at preschool. Megan arrived 10 minutes early, dressed professionally, and answered every question with confidence. She talked about developmental milestones, age-appropriate activities, and the importance of routine. She mentioned that she was saving money to eventually open her own in-home daycare. David met her the following weekend. He was equally impressed. On February 6, 2023, Megan Holloway began working for the Whitfield family. Her rate was $18 an hour, and her schedule was Monday through Thursday from 1 p.m. until Rachel or David returned home, usually around 6:30 p.m. For the first 3 weeks, everything seemed perfect. Emma, who was shy around new adults, warmed to Megan almost immediately. Lucas, more rambunctious, responded well to her calm but firm approach. Megan sent photos throughout the afternoon, the kids doing crafts, playing in the backyard, eating the healthy snacks Rachel had prepared. She cleaned up after activities. She followed the household rules about screen time. She even started a small garden project with Emma, planting seeds in paper cups on the windowsill. Rachel told her sister that hiring Megan was the best decision we've made in years. David told a co-worker that they'd finally gotten lucky. Neither of them knew that Megan Holloway had been fired from that daycare center, not because she wanted to pursue private childcare, but because a parent had complained about her leaving children unattended. Neither of them knew that one of her 3 references was her own cousin using a fake name. Neither of them knew that Megan was $23,000 in debt, mostly from online gambling, and that she'd been borrowing money from a man named Derek Vance, a man with a criminal record for fraud and theft. And neither of them knew that on February 27th, the Monday that would change their lives forever, Megan Holloway had no intention of spending the afternoon watching their children. She had other plans. The Whitfield home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on Maple Ridge Drive, a 4-bedroom colonial with a fenced backyard and a 2-car garage. Like many families with young children, Rachel and David had installed a basic home security system when they moved in. Motion sensors on the doors, a keypad by the front entrance, and a single outdoor camera pointed at the driveway. What Megan didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that 6 months earlier, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood, David had installed a second camera. This one was hidden inside a decorative bookshelf in the living room, positioned to capture the front door, the main hallway, and most of the living room itself. It was a nanny cam, though David had never thought of it that way. He'd bought it to catch a porch pirate. He'd forgotten to tell Rachel he'd installed it. And he certainly never mentioned it to Megan. That camera, a compact device disguised as a row of fake books, recorded continuously to a cloud server. It had a 7-day storage loop. Unless someone logged in to check the footage, it simply recorded over itself every week. On February 27th, that camera captured everything. At 12:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Megan was scheduled to arrive, Rachel left for her shift at Mercy General. She kissed both kids, reminded them to be good for Megan, and told Lucas that if he finished his vegetables at dinner, they could watch a movie before bed. She locked the front door behind her. The security system shows her car pulling out of the driveway at 12:49 p.m. At 1:03 p.m., Megan's silver Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. She entered through the front door using the code Rachel had given her, 4729. The nanny cam captured her setting down her purse on the kitchen counter, greeting the kids, and turning on the television in the living room. For the next hour and 12 minutes, the footage shows exactly what you'd expect from a normal afternoon. Emma and Lucas watched an animated movie. Megan sat on the couch, occasionally glancing at her phone. At 2:15 p.m., she made them a snack, apple slices and cheese crackers, arranged on the small plastic plates Rachel kept in the lower cabinet. But at 2:31 p.m., Megan's phone buzzed with a text message. The camera couldn't capture what the message said, but investigators would later recover it from her phone records. It was from Derek Vance. The message read, 30 mins. Don't be late or I'm coming to you. Megan's posture changed immediately. She stood up from the couch, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. Then she turned back to the children. The nanny cam captured what she said next, though her voice was faint. Hey guys, I need to run a quick errand. You're going to stay here and watch your movie, okay? I'll be right back. Emma, 4 years old, looked up from the screen. Mommy says we're not supposed to be alone. You won't be. Alone, Megan said. I'm just going to the mailbox. I'll be right outside. Don't open the door for anyone, okay? I'll be back in 10 minutes. She grabbed her keys and her purse. At 2:34 p.m., Megan Holloway walked out the front door, got into her car, and drove away. She left a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old alone in the house. The nanny cam kept recording. For the first several minutes, nothing unusual happened. Emma and Lucas continued watching their movie. Lucas got up once to get a drink of water from the kitchen, standing on his tiptoes to reach the dispenser on the refrigerator door. Emma talked to one of her stuffed animals. They seemed unaware that anything was wrong. At 2:41 p.m., 7 minutes after Megan left, someone knocked on the front door. The camera captured both children turning toward the sound. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit. Lucas stood frozen near the couch. The knock came again. Megan said, "Don't open it," Emma whispered. Lucas, being 6 and therefore believing himself to be essentially an adult, walked toward the door. Maybe it's Mommy. Maybe she forgot something. Mommy has a key, Emma said. But Lucas was already at the door. He was too short to see through the peephole. He stood on his tiptoes, trying to reach, and then he did something that would haunt his parents for years. He unlocked the door. The footage shows the door swinging open. A figure steps inside, a man wearing jeans and a dark hoodie. His face is partially obscured by the hood and the angle of the camera, but his build is clear. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose. The man said something to Lucas. The audio is too faint to make out the words. But whatever he said, Lucas stepped back. The man entered the house fully. The door closed behind him. For the next 4 minutes and 23 seconds, the camera recorded a scene that investigators would later describe as methodical and practiced. The man didn't rush. He didn't panic. He spoke to the children calmly, keeping his voice low. At one point, he crouched down to Emma's level, and she stopped crying. At 2:45 p.m., the man took Emma's hand. Lucas followed behind, clutching his sister's other hand. They walked out the front door together. The nanny cam captured the door closing behind them. Emma and Lucas Whitfield were gone. Megan Holloway returned to the house at 3:22 p.m., 48 minutes after she'd left, not the 10 minutes she'd promised. She'd driven to a parking lot behind a strip mall to meet Derek Vance, who was pressuring her about the $4,700 she owed him. The conversation had turned heated. She'd promised to pay him by the end of the month. He told her that wasn't good enough. When she walked back into the Whitfield home, she expected to find 2 children watching television. Instead, she found an empty house. The TV was still on. Emma's stuffed rabbit was lying on the floor near the couch. Lucas's sneakers, the ones with the light-up soles that he refused to wear inside, were sitting by the front door. But the children were gone. Megan would later tell police that her first thought was that they were hiding. She searched the house, calling their names. She checked under beds, in closets, behind the shower curtain in the bathroom. She checked the backyard, the garage, the basement storage area. Nothing. At 3:31 p.m., Megan Holloway called 911. The call lasted 7 minutes and 12 seconds. Investigators would later analyze every word, every pause, every inflection. Here's what she told the dispatcher. She'd been watching the kids all afternoon. They'd been sitting on the couch, watching a movie. She'd gone to the bathroom just for a few minutes, and when she came out, they were gone. She didn't know how long they'd been missing. She didn't know where they could have gone. She was freaking out. When the dispatcher asked if anyone else had been in the house, Megan said no. When the dispatcher asked if the doors had been locked, Megan said yes. When the dispatcher asked if she'd seen or heard anything unusual, Megan said no. Every answer was a lie. Cedar Grove Police Department received the call at 3:32 p.m. The first officer, Patrol Deputy Marcus Chen, arrived at 3:41 p.m. By 4 p.m., there were 6 officers on scene, a K-9 unit en route, and a perimeter being established around the neighborhood. Megan Holloway stood in the driveway, crying. She told Officer Chen the same story she told the dispatcher. She'd been in the bathroom. The kids had been watching TV. She came out and they were gone. It didn't make sense. 2 children, ages 4 and 6, don't simply vanish from a locked house. They don't walk out the front door without their shoes. They don't leave behind their favorite toys. But at that point, no one had any reason to believe Megan was lying. She was distraught. She was cooperative. She'd called 911 herself. And there was no obvious evidence of foul play, no broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no blood, no struggle. The working theory in those first critical hours was that the children had somehow gotten out of the house on their own and wandered off. Maybe Emma had wanted to find a neighbor's cat. Maybe Lucas had decided to explore. Kids that age were unpredictable, so the search focused outward. Officers canvassed the neighborhood. The K-9 unit picked up a scent trail, leading from the front door to the sidewalk, where it abruptly ended, likely where the children had gotten into a vehicle. That detail should have raised alarms. A 4-year-old and a 6-year-old don't walk to the sidewalk and get into a stranger's car voluntarily, not without screaming, not without someone noticing. But in the chaos of those first hours, with frantic parents arriving home, with neighbors flooding into the street, with the sun beginning to set, the implications of that scent trail weren't fully examined. Rachel Whitfield received the call from Officer Chen at 3:58 p.m., just as she was finishing a blood draw on a 7-year-old patient. The words didn't make sense at first. "Your children are missing. Your babysitter called 911. We need you to come home immediately." Rachel would later describe the drive home as being underwater. She remembered very little of it, just the white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel, the way her hands wouldn't stop shaking, the prayer she kept repeating under her breath. Please let them be okay. Please let them be okay. David received the call 3 minutes later. He was 45 minutes away at a distribution facility in Gastonia. He broke every speed limit getting home and still didn't arrive until 4:47 p.m. By then, Rachel was standing in her living room, surrounded by officers, being asked questions she couldn't answer. When did you last see your children? What were they wearing? Do they have any medical conditions? Has anyone made threats against your family? Does your husband have enemies? Do you? And throughout it all, Megan Holloway sat on the couch, repeating her story. She'd been in the bathroom. The kids were watching TV. She came out and they were gone. Rachel looked at her, this young woman she'd trusted, this person she'd invited into her home, into her children's lives, and she wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that this was some terrible accident, some inexplicable tragedy that no one could have prevented. But something felt wrong. Rachel couldn't identify it. At first, it was just a feeling, a mother's intuition, a whisper in the back of her mind that something about Megan's demeanor was off. She was crying, yes. She seemed upset, yes. But there was something missing behind her eyes, some quality of genuine panic that Rachel would have expected from someone who had just lost 2 children in their care. Later, Rachel would describe it as watching someone perform grief rather than feel it. But she didn't say anything to the police, not yet. Because what could she say? I have a bad feeling? That's not evidence, that's not proof, that's just a desperate mother looking for someone to blame. So the investigation continued and Megan's story held, and for the next 31 hours, everyone believed that Emma and Lucas Whitfield had somehow wandered away from their own home. It was David who thought of the camera. At 11:42 p.m. on February 27th, almost 9 hours after his children vanished, David Whitfield was sitting at his kitchen table surrounded by missing child flyers that a neighbor had volunteered to print. He'd given the same statement to 3 different officers. He'd called every relative, every friend, every coworker who might have any information. He'd driven through the neighborhood himself, shouting his children's names from the window of his car. And now he was sitting in his kitchen, feeling utterly helpless, when his eyes fell on the bookshelf in the living room. The bookshelf with the hidden camera. He'd forgotten about it. In the chaos of the afternoon, in the nightmare of the evening, he'd completely forgotten that the camera was there, that it had been recording everything, that the footage might still be stored on the cloud server. David stood up so quickly that he knocked over his chair. Rachel looked at him, confused. What is it? The camera, David said. The nanny cam. I put it in the bookshelf 6 months ago. I forgot to tell you. I forgot to tell anyone." He grabbed his laptop and logged into the security app. His hands were shaking so badly that he mistyped his password twice. The footage loaded slowly. The app's interface was clunky, designed for casual users who wanted to check on their front porch, not for parents desperately searching for their missing children. But eventually, the timeline appeared. David scrolled back to 12:47 p.m., Rachel leaving for work. Then 1:03 p.m., Megan arriving. Then the afternoon playing out exactly as Megan had described, except at 2:34 p.m., David saw something that made his blood run cold. He watched Megan Holloway stand up from the couch. He watched her say something to the children. He watched her grab her purse and her keys and walk out the front door. She didn't go to the bathroom. She left. She left his children alone. And then at 2:41 p.m., David watched a stranger knock on his front door. He watched Lucas open it. He watched a man in a dark hoodie walk into his house. And he watched that man lead Emma and Lucas out the front door, hand in hand, into whatever nightmare awaited them. David Whitfield called 911 for the second time that night at 11:57 p.m. His voice, captured on the emergency recording, was barely recognizable, a mixture of rage and terror and desperate hope. "I have footage," he said. "I have footage of who took my kids. She lied. The babysitter lied. Someone came into my house and took my children, and she lied about everything." The dispatcher asked him to stay on the line. Officers arrived at the Whitfield home at 12:14 a.m. on February 28th. By 12:30 a.m., Detective Sergeant Maria Vasquez had taken over the investigation. By 1 a.m., she had watched the footage 17 times. The man in the footage was not immediately identifiable. His face was never fully visible to the camera. But his build, his posture, the way he moved, these were details that could be analyzed, compared, matched. And Megan Holloway's lies were now documented, undeniable, preserved in high-definition video. At 1:47 a.m., Detective Vasquez knocked on the door of Megan Holloway's apartment. Megan answered in pajamas, her eyes puffy from crying, or from whatever she'd been doing for the past several hours. She looked surprised to see police officers at her door again. "Ms. Holloway," Detective Vasquez said, "we need to have another conversation, and this time I'd suggest you tell us the truth." What happened next would unfold over the course of the next 70 hours. It would involve cell phone records, financial investigations, a second man named Derek Vance, and a trail of evidence that led investigators to an abandoned warehouse 17 miles from Cedar Grove. But the turning point, the moment that cracked the case open, was a hidden camera that a father forgot he'd installed, and the lie that a babysitter thought no one would ever catch. The interrogation of Megan Holloway began at 2:15 a.m. in interview room 3 of the Cedar Grove Police Department. Detective Vasquez conducted the interview with Detective Paul Morrison as secondary. The session was recorded on both video and audio, standard procedure for cases involving missing children. For the first 47 minutes, Megan maintained her original story. She'd been in the bathroom. The kids were watching TV. She came out and they were gone. Detective Vasquez let her talk. She asked clarifying questions. She nodded sympathetically. She said things like, "I understand," and that must have been terrifying. She gave Megan every opportunity to tell the truth on her own terms. Megan didn't take any of those opportunities. At 3:02 a.m., Detective Vasquez placed a laptop on the table and pressed play. The footage showed Megan walking out the front door at 2:34 p.m., leaving 2 children alone in the house. Megan's face went white. "Would you like to revise your statement?" Detective Vasquez asked. What followed was a textbook example of incremental confession, the process by which a suspect slowly reveals the truth, piece by piece, often minimizing their involvement at each stage. Megan admitted she'd left the house, but only for a few minutes, just to get some air. She had a headache. She needed a break. Detective Vasquez showed her the GPS data from her phone, which placed her at a strip mall parking lot 3.2 miles away for over 40 minutes. Megan admitted she'd driven somewhere, but she was just running a quick errand. She didn't think anything bad would happen. The kids were fine when she left. Detective Vasquez asked what errand she was running. Megan said she had to pick up a prescription. Detective Vasquez asked which pharmacy. Megan couldn't name one. At 3:41 a.m., Detective Vasquez introduced a new piece of information. They'd pulled Megan's text messages from the previous week. They knew about Derek Vance. They knew about the $4,700 debt. They knew about the threatening messages he'd been sending. And they knew that at 2:31 p.m., Derek had texted her, "30 mins, don't be late or I'm coming to you." Megan started crying again, but this time the tears seemed different. Less performative, more genuinely afraid. "He told me I had to meet him," she said. "He said if I didn't come, he'd come to me. I couldn't let him come to the house. I couldn't let him see the kids. I thought I'd just be gone for 10 minutes. Detective Vasquez leaned forward. Who is Derek Vance, Megan? And finally, the story started to make sense. Derek Vance was 31 years old. He'd grown up in Charlotte, dropped out of high school at 16, and accumulated a criminal record that included 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of theft, 1 count of assault, and a dismissed charge of intimidation that was pled down from extortion. He was also Megan's ex-boyfriend. They dated for 8 months, from March to November of 2022. During that time, Megan had borrowed $18,000 from him, money she claimed he'd offered freely, money he claimed was a loan with interest. After they broke up, Derek demanded repayment. When Megan couldn't pay, the demands escalated. He showed up at her apartment. He called her at all hours. He sent text messages that walked the line between threatening and technically legal. And when Megan got the job with the Whitfields, Derek saw an opportunity. He knew I was working with kids, Megan said in her interrogation. He knew I couldn't have him showing up at a client's house. He used it against me. Every time I fell behind on payments, he'd threaten to tell them about my past, about getting fired from the daycare, about everything. Detective Vasquez asked the obvious question. Did Derek take those children? Megan claimed she didn't know. She claimed she'd met Derek at the strip mall, given him $400 in cash, all she had, and begged him for more time. She claimed he'd kept her there for almost an hour, pressuring her, threatening her before finally letting her go. She claimed she had no idea that anything had happened at the Whitfield house until she walked in and found it empty, but Detective Vasquez had been doing this job for 17 years, and she recognized the careful architecture of a half-truth. Megan, she said, we're going to find Derek. We're going to find those children, and when we do, we're going to find out exactly what you knew and when you knew it. This is your last chance to help yourself. If you had any involvement in what happened to those kids, you need to tell me now. Megan Holloway looked at the laptop screen, still frozen on the image of a man in a dark hoodie leading Emma and Lucas out the front door. And she said something that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. I didn't know he was going to take them. I swear to God, I didn't know. He just said he needed to see the house. He said he wanted to know where I was working. He said if I left the door unlocked and gave him a few minutes alone, he'd forgive $2,000 of my debt. Detective Vasquez kept her expression neutral. The door was unlocked? Megan nodded, tears streaming down her face. I disabled the alarm and left the front door unlocked. I didn't think he'd actually come inside. I thought he just wanted to look around, maybe see if there was anything worth. I didn't think he'd take the kids. Who takes kids? I thought he'd just grab some jewelry or whatever and leave. I never thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. At 4:23 a.m. on February 28th, an arrest warrant was issued for Derek Vance. The charges included 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit burglary. A second warrant was issued for Megan Holloway. The charges, 2 counts of child endangerment, 1 count of conspiracy to commit burglary, and 2 counts of accessory to kidnapping. Megan was booked at 5:15 a.m. Her mugshot would later circulate widely on local news and social media, her tear-stained face becoming the symbol of a betrayal that every parent dreads, the person you trust with your children turning out to be the one who puts them in danger. But the arrests didn't bring Emma and Lucas home. They were still missing, and Derek Vance was nowhere to be found. The search for Derek Vance involved every resource available to the Cedar Grove Police Department and, within hours, the FBI. An Amber Alert was issued at 5 a.m. on February 28th. Derek's photograph, taken from his most recent arrest in 2021, was distributed to every law enforcement agency in North Carolina and the surrounding states. His known associates were contacted and questioned. His last known address, a rental property in East Charlotte, was searched. His vehicle, a 2017 black Dodge Charger, was flagged in every police database. But Derek Vance had vanished as completely as the children he'd taken. The investigation turned to his connections. Derek had spent time in various criminal circles, mostly low-level fraud and theft operations. He wasn't a gang member, wasn't connected to organized crime, didn't have the kind of infrastructure that would allow him to disappear completely. So where was he hiding? Detective Vasquez focused on the financial angle. Derek was pressuring Megan for money, which suggested he needed it. People who need money leave trails. They sell things, they borrow from others, they make desperate decisions. At 2 p.m. on February 28th, analysts flagged a transaction. Derek's prepaid phone, a burner he'd styled, purchased 3 weeks earlier, had been topped up with a $50 card bought at a convenience store in Huntersville, approximately 12 miles northeast of Cedar Grove. The store had security cameras. At 3:45 p.m., investigators obtained the footage. It showed Derek Vance purchasing the phone card at 9:47 p.m. on February 27th, more than 6 hours after Emma and Lucas were taken. He was alone in the footage. There were no children visible in the store or in the parking lot outside. But there was something else. Derek was wearing different clothes than the man in the nanny cam footage. In the Whitfield house, the intruder wore jeans and a dark hoodie. In the convenience store, Derek was wearing khaki pants and a gray jacket. He'd changed, which meant he'd gone somewhere between taking the children and buying the phone card. Somewhere he felt safe enough to change his clothes. Somewhere he might have left Emma and Lucas. Investigators pulled cell tower data for Derek's burner phone. The triangulation was imperfect. Burner phones don't ping as frequently as smartphones, but they were able to establish a general pattern of movement. After leaving the Whitfield house, Derek's phone had traveled northeast toward Huntersville. It had pinged a tower near an industrial area outside of town at approximately 3:30 p.m. Then it went dark for several hours before reappearing at the convenience store. That industrial area became the focus of the search. The zone in question covered approximately 4 square miles of warehouses, manufacturing facilities, and undeveloped land. It was the kind of area that saw heavy traffic during business hours and virtually none at night. The kind of area where someone could hide. At 6:00 p.m. on February 28th, search teams began canvassing the zone. K-9 units were deployed. A helicopter with infrared imaging swept the area from above. Nothing. The search continued through the night and into the morning of March 1st. Officers checked every building they could access, but many of the warehouses were locked, abandoned, or owned by companies that couldn't be reached after hours. At 7:15 a.m. on March 1st, more than 40 hours since Emma and Lucas were taken, a patrol officer named Jamie Rodriguez noticed something unusual. She was driving past an abandoned textile warehouse on the eastern edge of the search zone when she saw tire tracks in the mud leading to a side entrance. The tracks were fresh, made within the last day or two, based on the moisture content of the soil. Officer Rodriguez called it in and waited for backup. At 7:34 a.m., a tactical team entered the warehouse. What they found inside would be described by first responders as a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. The warehouse had been abandoned for at least 3 years. Most of the interior was filled with rusted machinery, broken pallets, and accumulated debris. But in the far corner of the building, someone had created a makeshift living space. There was a mattress on the floor, a cooler filled with bottled water and snacks, a portable heater, a battery-powered lantern, and huddled together under a pile of blankets, dirty and frightened but alive, were Emma and Lucas Whitfield. The children had been left in the warehouse for over 40 hours. They'd been given food and water, but they'd been alone for most of that time, 2 small children in a dark, cold building, not knowing if anyone was coming for them. Emma was holding Lucas's hand when officers found them. She'd been telling him stories she later told a child psychologist to keep him from being scared. Stories about princesses and dragons and a mommy and daddy who would definitely come rescue them. She was 4 years old. The children were transported to Mercy General Hospital, the same hospital where their mother worked, for evaluation. Rachel and David Whitfield were notified at 7:52 a.m. They arrived at the hospital at 8:31 a.m. The reunion was captured by a hospital security camera. It shows Rachel running down the hallway, David right behind her. It shows them bursting through the doors of the pediatric unit. It shows them falling to their knees beside their children's beds, gathering Emma and Lucas into their arms, crying so hard they couldn't speak. The footage went viral within hours. It was shared millions of times across social media platforms, accompanied by captions like, "This is what real love looks like," and "Never give up hope." What the viral footage didn't show was the medical examination that followed. Emma had developed a mild case of hypothermia from the unheated warehouse. Lucas had a respiratory infection that would require antibiotics. Both children showed signs of acute stress reaction and would need months of therapy to process what they'd experienced. The footage also didn't show what the children told the investigators about their time in the warehouse. Emma remembered very little. She knew a man had taken them. She knew he'd told them they were going on an adventure. She knew he'd driven them somewhere and told them to stay quiet. She knew he'd left and never come back. Lucas remembered more. He remembered the man's voice. He remembered being scared. He remembered Emma trying to make him feel better. And he remembered one specific detail that would prove crucial to the investigation. He said he was going to get our mom, Lucas told investigators. He said our mom had something for him and he'd be right back. Derek Vance had never intended to hurt the children. He'd never intended to ransom them. His plan, as investigators would later piece together, was much simpler and much more pathetic. He'd taken Emma and Lucas as leverage. Derek believed that Megan would do anything to get those children back, including emptying the Whitfield's house of valuables, stealing cash from their accounts, or simply paying off her debt in full. He left the children in the warehouse and contacted Megan, demanding $25,000 for their safe return. but Megan had panicked. Instead of paying or negotiating, she'd called 911. And once the police were involved, Derek's plan fell apart. He couldn't return the children without being arrested. He couldn't contact Megan again without leading investigators to his location. He couldn't even check on Emma and Lucas without risking discovery. So he'd run. He'd abandoned 2 children in an unheated warehouse and fled the state. Derek Vance was apprehended on March 3, 2023 at a motel in Knoxville, Tennessee. He'd paid for the room with cash, money he'd withdrawn from an ATM in Charlotte using a stolen debit card. He was arrested without incident by FBI agents who tracked him through a combination of cell phone data, witness tips, and old-fashioned detective work. During his arrest, Derek maintained that he'd never intended to hurt the children. "I just needed the money," he said. "I was going to bring them back. I was always going to bring them back." Whether that was true, no one would ever know for certain. The legal proceedings that followed Emma and Lucas's rescue moved swiftly by the standards of the American justice system. Derek Vance was charged with 2 counts of kidnapping in the first degree, 2 counts of child endangerment, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of conspiracy. He rejected multiple plea offers, apparently believing he could convince a jury that he'd never intended permanent harm. He was wrong. The trial began on September 11, 2023 in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The prosecution's case was straightforward. The nanny cam footage, the children's testimony, delivered via closed-circuit television to spare them the trauma of facing their abductor, the physical evidence from the warehouse, and Derek's own incriminating statements. The defense attempted to portray Derek as a desperate man who'd made a terrible mistake, not a predator who deliberately targeted children. They argued that the kidnapping was situational, that Derek had panicked when his extortion scheme against Megan failed, and that the children were never in serious danger. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. On September 28, 2023, Derek Vance was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced on November 15th to 47 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, during sentencing, made a statement that was widely quoted in local media. "Mr. Vance, you left 2 small children alone in an abandoned building for over 40 hours. You left them in the cold and the dark, with no guarantee that anyone would find them. The fact that they survived is not a testament to your mercy. It is a testament to the resilience of children and the dedication of law enforcement. You are a predator who targeted the vulnerable, and society must be protected from you." Megan Holloway's case was more complicated. She was charged with 2 counts of child endangerment, 1 count of conspiracy to commit burglary, and 1 count of accessory to kidnapping. Her defense attorney argued that she'd been a victim herself, manipulated and coerced by Derek Vance, terrified for her safety, never intending for anyone to get hurt. The prosecution argued that Megan had made a series of deliberate choices that put 2 children's lives at risk. She'd lied on her job application. She'd left children alone in a house. She'd unlocked the door and disabled the alarm so that a criminal could enter. And when given multiple opportunities to tell the truth, she'd lied to protect herself. On December 4, 2023, Megan Holloway pleaded guilty to 2 counts of child endangerment and 1 count of accessory to kidnapping. The other charges were dropped as part of the plea agreement. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7. During her sentencing hearing, Megan read a prepared statement expressing remorse for her actions. She said she'd made terrible choices and that she understood she damaged lives beyond repair. She apologized to the Whitfield family, though she did not look at them while she spoke. Rachel Whitfield submitted a victim impact statement that was read aloud by the prosecutor. It said in part, "We trusted you with the most precious things in our lives. We invited you into our home. We believed you when you said you cared about our children, and you repaid that trust by abandoning them, by lying to us, by enabling a criminal to take them from their own living room. My children have nightmares now. My daughter is afraid to be alone. My son asks again and again, why the nice lady let the bad man take them. You did this. Not Derek Vance alone, you. And I hope you think about that every single day for the rest of your life." The Whitfield family also filed a civil lawsuit against Megan Holloway, seeking damages for emotional distress, medical expenses, and ongoing therapy costs for Emma and Lucas. The case was settled out of court in February 2024 for an undisclosed amount, though legal analysts estimated the settlement at between $400,000 and $600,000, most of which would be paid through Megan's future earnings and any assets she might accumulate. But the lawsuits didn't end there. The Whitfields also filed suit against the online platform where they had first connected with Megan, arguing that the site had failed to properly verify the references and background information submitted by caregivers. That case is still pending, though it has attracted national attention as part of a broader conversation about the gig economy of childcare and the lack of meaningful oversight for babysitters and nannies who are hired through online platforms. The case also prompted legislative action. In May 2024, a North Carolina state representative introduced the Whitfield Children's Safety Act, which would require all professional childcare providers, including individual babysitters who work more than 10 hours per week, to undergo standardized background checks and reference verification through a state-run database. The bill is currently in committee. None of this, of course, could undo what happened to Emma and Lucas. In the months following their rescue, both children underwent intensive therapy. Emma, now 5, has made significant progress. She's returned to preschool, reconnected with friends, and begun to show the resilience that children often display after trauma. Her therapist describes her as remarkably adaptable, though she notes that Emma still has occasional nightmares and becomes anxious when separated from her parents. Lucas, now 7, has had a more difficult recovery. He struggles with feelings of guilt. The belief that if he hadn't opened the door, none of this would have happened. His therapist has worked with him extensively to understand that he was a child who made a decision based on incomplete information, and that the adults who should have protected him failed to do so. Both children have been told, in age-appropriate terms, what happened to them and why. They know that Megan made a mistake. They know that Derek was a bad man who is now in prison. They know that their parents love them and that what happened was not their fault. What they don't fully understand yet is the randomness of it all. The idea that their family's tragedy began because their grandmother had a stroke, because their mother posted on a neighborhood app, because a young woman with a gambling problem responded to that post, because an ex-boyfriend saw an opportunity for profit. The chain of events that led to Emma and Lucas being taken from their home was so mundane, so ordinary, so relatable to any parent who has ever needed help with childcare. And that's what made the Whitfield case resonate so powerfully with the public. This could have happened to anyone. Rachel Whitfield returned to work at Mercy General Hospital in April 2023, though she reduced her hours significantly. David took a demotion to a position with more predictable scheduling. They sold the house on Maple Ridge Drive and moved to a different neighborhood, one where Emma and Lucas wouldn't have to walk past the living room where they had been taken. The new house has a comprehensive security system. There are cameras in every room. The nanny cam that once sat forgotten in a bookshelf is now part of a network that David checks multiple times a day. They've hired a new caregiver for the children, a 53-year-old woman named Margaret Chen, who came with 15 years of verifiable experience and references that David personally called and visited. Margaret submitted to a criminal background check, a credit check, and a drug test. She agreed to regular unannounced visits from Rachel and David during work hours. She also agreed to never, under any circumstances, leave the children alone. The trust that was broken on February 27th, 2023 will never be fully restored. Rachel has said in interviews that she doesn't know if she'll ever feel completely safe leaving her children with anyone again. David has said that he checks the security cameras so often that it's become a compulsion, something he knows isn't healthy but can't stop doing. But they're trying, they're healing, they're moving forward, and they're grateful every single day that their children came home. There's a moment from the investigation that has stayed with Detective Vasquez. She's spoken about it in interviews and at law enforcement conferences, using it as a teaching example for other investigators. When she first watched the nanny cam footage, the full, unedited footage of Derek Vance entering the Whitfield home and leading 2 children away, she noticed something that didn't make it into most of the news coverage. In the footage, just before Derek takes Emma's hand, there's a moment where Emma looks directly at the camera. She couldn't have known it was there, hidden as it was inside a row of fake books, but she looks right at it, as if somehow sensing that someone, somewhere, would eventually see what was happening to her. Her expression in that moment is difficult to describe. It's not fear, exactly. It's not confusion. It's something closer to resignation, the look of a child who has learned, far too young, that the world contains dangers she cannot understand or control. Detective Vasquez has thought about that expression many times. She's thought about what it means to be 4 years old and to have your safety entrusted to an adult who doesn't deserve that trust. She's thought about the random cruelty of a world where children can be taken from their own homes because of debts they know nothing about, by people they've never met. And she's thought about the camera, the forgotten camera, the accidental camera, the camera that existed because a father wanted to catch a package thief and ended up saving his children's lives. If David Whitfield hadn't installed that camera, she said in one interview, we might never have found those kids. We might still be looking for them, or we might have found them too late. One decision, made months earlier for a completely different reason, changed everything. The Whitfield case has become a kind of parable in parenting circles and law enforcement training. It's cited as evidence for the importance of background checks, for the value of home security systems, for the need to trust but verify when it comes to childcare. But it's also a reminder of something darker, that there are no guarantees, that you can do everything right, check references, install cameras, ask all the right questions, and still be vulnerable to betrayal. That the people we trust can become the people who hurt us, sometimes deliberately, sometimes through negligence, sometimes through a chain of circumstances that no one could have predicted. The best any of us can do is prepare, pay attention, trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and hope that if the worst happens, there will be something, a camera, a witness, a lucky break, that brings our children home. Emma Whitfield turned 6 in September 2024. Her parents threw her a birthday party at a trampoline park, the first time she'd been to a party since before the kidnapping. She jumped and played and laughed with her friends, and for a few hours she looked like any other first grader celebrating her birthday. At the end of the party, Rachel asked her what her birthday wish had been. Emma thought about it for a moment, then said, "I wished that Lucas wouldn't be scared anymore." Rachel hugged her daughter and didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. How do you respond to a 6-year-old who has learned to carry her brother's fears alongside her own? How do you explain that healing takes time, that some wounds don't close easily, that the world can be both beautiful and terrible in equal measure? You don't, Rachel realized. You just love them. You just keep loving them, and you hope that's enough. Lucas Whitfield is in 2nd grade now. He's gotten into building models, spacecraft and robots, and intricate Lego structures that cover most of his bedroom floor. His therapist says the building is good for him, that it gives him a sense of control and accomplishment that helps counteract the helplessness he felt during the kidnapping. He doesn't talk about what happened very often, but sometimes late at night he'll come to his parents' room and ask if he can sleep with them. He never says why, he doesn't have to. The Whitfields say yes every time. The case file on Emma and Lucas Whitfield was officially closed on December 15, 2023 after Derek Vance's sentencing. It runs to 847 pages and includes police reports, forensic analyses, interview transcripts, court documents, and the footage from the nanny cam that changed everything, the footage itself. Has been preserved as evidence and sealed from public release. The Whitfields have declined all requests to share it, and the police department has honored their wishes. Some media outlets attempted to obtain it through Freedom of Information Act requests, but the courts ruled that releasing the footage would violate the children's privacy and cause unnecessary additional trauma. So the footage remains unseen by the public, those images of a man in a dark hoodie leading 2 small children out of their own home, of a 4-year-old girl looking at a hidden camera as if pleading for someone to help. Perhaps that's for the best. Some things shouldn't be watched for entertainment. Some stories shouldn't need to exist at all. What remains is the aftermath. 2 children learning to trust again, 2 parents learning to let go of constant fear, a community reminded of the fragility of safety, and a system, imperfect but persistent, that ultimately brought Emma and Lucas home. The babysitter told police the missing kids were watching TV, but the hidden camera told a different story. And in the end, the camera's story was the one that mattered.